Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Just like your favorite neighborhood bookshop, this show is a place to explore, find hidden gems, and meet new writers from every corner of the publishing world. Feel free to browse around and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm your host, Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and your guide to great conversations with some amazing writers. This is episode number 278. If you enjoy the show, please take a moment to leave a review, follow along on social media, and share the podcast with fellow readers. Before we dive in, I want to mention that I will be attending Killer Nashville this week. If you've never been, it's a writing conference for all crime genres, incorporating mystery, thriller, suspense, action, horror, even romance. A huge thank you to all the organizers and volunteers working behind the scenes to make the conference a success. If you'll be there as well, please stop by and say hello. I'd love to meet you. On today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm joined by author Pam Webber to discuss her new novel, Massawa. This historical romance is the first book in a new series. Set in North Africa during World War II, it is inspired by the real American women who were recruited to serve as spies. The novel follows Kit, a newly minted spy with no field experience, but plenty of courage, as she is sent to the coastal city of Massawa in Eritrea to investigate a conspiracy that threatens the only Allied naval base on the Red Sea, a strategic outpost crucial to halting the Nazi advance in North Africa. Blending real historical events with espionage, danger, adventure, and romance, Massawa shines a light on a fascinating and little-known chapter of World War II history. In this episode, Pam and I chat about her writing journey, the extensive research behind the novel, and the remarkable event known as the Miracle of Massawa, which played an important role in the Allied war effort. All that and more coming up next. Pam Webber, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Stacey, I'm excited about being here.
I thought what we could do today is talk about your new book. It's the first book in a brand new series titled Massawa. If you don't mind, tell us a bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Let me start with what inspired me, because that's going to lead to what the book is about. But okay. I had just finished up my first series, and I had gone to lunch with my brother, who is an amateur historian, but there's really nothing amateurish about what he does. He's quite good. And I was lamenting, okay, I want to start a new series, historical fiction, but I wasn't sure what direction to go in. There had been so much published about war. I like World War II, but there had been so much published, especially with regard to women and women spies and so forth, in Europe. I didn't want to go there. And he quite easily said, you got to talk about Massawa. And I said, what's Massawa? And he said, you need look up something called the Miracle at Massawa. So I did. And that one suggestion just kind of started one of the most amazing journeys into historical facts about World War II, but not in Europe. This is in North Africa. And I knew immediately that I needed to write about this story. Everybody knows about, the World War II in the Mediterranean and the invasion of North Africa, but very few people know about what happened in this tiny little country of Eritrea, and specifically in the coastal city of Massawa. So that led to the book. What the miracle was actually, in brief, was that the Italians had invaded Eritrea 70 years before War II, and they had built this huge naval base on the Red Sea. Well, when the Brits kicked them out of Eritrea as they were getting ready for the invasion of North Africa, the Italians destroyed the base. They sunk 40 ships across the mouth of the harbor so the Allies couldn't come in and use the base, and they destroyed everything on the base. They sunk the cranes, anything that could have been used to help restore and clean up and supply ships, they just destroyed, and as well as many buildings on the base. So anyway, when the Brits took over, Churchill wanted to restore the base, but his salvage people in the British Navy said, "Hey, it can't be done. It's a mess." So he called Roosevelt. And Roosevelt sent this freshly out of retirement salvage officer named Commander Edward Ellsberg. And Ellsberg went to Massawa and in 6 days said, yes, the base is salvageable, but it's going to take a lot of work. And there was nobody to send. The US had nobody to send. The Brits had nobody to send. Ellsberg had about a half a dozen allies, a couple of Americans, a couple of Brits, a couple of civilians. Anyway, he restored that base in 6 weeks using those 6 people and 6,000 Eritreans. And that's why it's called the Miracle at Massawa. But what happened in the context of that, and people who didn't want that base to reopen, is where the mystery in my book starts. It is Massawa, the title or the book, it's a World War II espionage thriller featuring a female newly minted OSS agent. And I'm sure you know the OSS was the precursor to the CIA. And in 1942, women weren't doing much with the war. Our Congress was a very patriarchal Congress. They weren't sure they wanted women going in harm's way. So there was a lot of angst about women serving, and serving in particular in military and or clandestine services. But there was this guy who started the OSS. His name was William Donovan, aka Wild Bill, and that should tell you something right there. Wild Bill Donovan. And he absolutely disagreed. Not only was he a notorious womanizer, but he, according to several biographies on him, but he also said women were the best emetic for men's secrets that there were, and that the U.S. had to use women. And to that end, he hired thousands of them. About 1,500 ended up serving in Europe and North Africa. So anyway, my protagonist is based on one of those newly minted OSS female agents, and she and a British counterpart named Mark are sent to Massawa to investigate the disappearance of millions of dollars of payroll money, and in the process discover a pretty significant conspiracy that stretches all the way to the Mediterranean. And not only that, but then another smaller conspiracy having to do with the Eritrean people and their culture. So that's what it's about. And I'm quite excited about it. It is a new series for me. And it's the first time I've tackled anything really having to do with World War II. So I'm excited about it being released.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back a bit to the history that you were just mentioning. In particular, the OSS and the introduction of women.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about the training of women to be spies,
Mm-hmm.
and how you decided to craft Kit, your main character, in particular. So what did you learn about the recruitment of women, the training of women, the kind of action that they saw as spies for the US? And then how did you decide to build Kit's character? What did you decide to use? What was important?
Okay. The one of the things that I have done over the past several years is read a lot about female spies, in particular Virginia Hall. I don't know if you know who Virginia Hall was or not, but she was she was one of the first real OSS agents, and she was stationed in occupied France and was quite instrumental not only in causing obstacles and roadblocks for the Nazis, but also when it came to D-Day, she was quite instrumental in getting the French resistance activated and ready to come in on the Nazis from the backside of Normandy. And what she did, she was there for, I think, over 4 years, constantly running from and escaping and disguising herself to escape the Nazis. And she had an artificial leg. She had lost a leg in a shooting accident in the United States before she ever joined the OSS. But then when they started closing in around her, this incredible woman hiked across the French Alps to escape with that artificial leg in the dead of winter. So the courage to do what she did, the courage to keep on doing it for 4 years, knowing that the entire Nazi organization in France was trying to catch her, and that she made it out alive and she made it back to the US was just mind-boggling to me. So she was that courage, that fearlessness had to become a part of Kit, my agent. That being said, I don't think Kit's quite as smart or quite as savvy as Virginia Hall was, because number one, she's newly minted. She came out of the Defense Department. She was an analyst in the Defense Department, and she really hadn't up to that point in time had a hard life. Now, the OSS training, you've got to understand the OSS was new, so the training was very rudimentary. They had something called a Camp X, which everybody went through. They had other camps scattered all across the United States, but interestingly, they were using the national parks as a disguise for these training camps, including right here in Virginia, the Shenandoah National Park. But they had several camps set up all across the United States and Canada. Camp X, I believe it was in Canada. And they put these female agents through the same type of training that the males went through. But it was very rudimentary. They had to, learn how to fire guns and self-defense and evasion and tactics and linguistics and all the types of things that they were training the men for. And interestingly, the MI6, which was is Great Britain's espionage agency. They were quite influential in helping to get the OSS started, and they were very influential in helping to train the agents early on until the American apparatus got up and running sufficiently that they could carry the load on their own. So it was really the training of the women. And the Brits already had women serving. It wasn't new to them. They'd been in war for a while now, so they had lots of women serving. So when they came over, it wasn't new to them to have women in it. It wasn't foreign, and they just matriculated them right into the normal training.
Tell us a little bit about Kit, her personality, how she feels about being a spy, and let's talk a little bit about how you saw her growth.
Kit is, as were the accounts of some of these early female agents, was quite naive. Or I had her be quite naive at the beginning. It's one thing to do the training and excel and come out and, feel you're ready. But one of the things, and her love interest in this story, Jake, who is also her young boss, laments that he just doesn't think she's ready because she hasn't had any field experience. Well, in Kit's naivete, she thinks I am ready. I've done everything I know, and I'm ready. And what's interesting about her is that she didn't get blinded by it once she realized, oh my gosh, I don't know everything. And she's having to think on the fly and adjust for, incorrect thinking when she's actually in the middle of a field experience. That was fun to create and watch that growth as she gets closer and closer and closer to unraveling this conspiracy. And then even at the end, her continuing naivete, and how another agent is able to manipulate her causes a lot of reflection, and for her to prepare for the next journey. So following her, and to some degree, I think she's my alter ego. She's my Pam Webber wannabe because she was so brave, so brave. And one of the things that struck me about these books that I was reading about the female spies in World War II, the patriotism, the courage, knowing what was going to happen to them, knowing that, and they waded right in anyway. I wanted Kit to have that level of courage. I also wanted her to be smart and able to think on the fly, like so many people in these types of careers have to do. And I wanted that evident. And one of the big things that people were saying at the time, women were kind of infiltrating the military and the clandestine services, was that they didn't think they could kill, that they didn't think they could do what was necessary when it came time. Like we were missing a gene that would say, "Hey, I can't protect myself." But I wanted it evident that that this girl was smart. She knew she had a lot to learn. She was working hard to learn it, but she still had the raw material to do the job.
Yeah. As you mentioned, this miracle at Massawa is, I think you said, a sort of little known event. I'm curious why you think that is. What was it about? Was it just the fact that where it was located or who was involved? Why do you think that is not part of the bigger discussion of World War II?
That's $1 million question. It's a really good question. My brother is a fanatic for those little stories. He said the what really happened in all of these places is the little stories because they're the ones that have not been glossed over or interpreted in broader interpretations. It's the little stories where the truth really will come out. Massawa is such, and I think at the time, North Africa was the secondary theater. You know, Europe was where, all the big battles were. It wasn't until Rommel started to invade or had invaded North Africa and was making his way towards Egypt and the Suez Canal that things got interesting. And, people think, well, why is he bothering with North Africa? Well, the Suez Canal, if you control the Suez Canal, you control the Mediterranean. And right across the Suez Canal were the rich oil fields of the Middle East. So it was, if anything, both the Allies and the Germans were having a hard time keeping their vehicles on the road because they didn't have gas, they didn't have oil. So why that fact of Rommel's intent on capturing the Suez Canal and capturing the oil fields of the Middle East is not taking a bigger a role in when we look at World War II history, I can't tell you. I don't know. I found it absolutely fascinating. And had he been successful, there might have been a different story to World War II, and especially when it comes to controlling the Mediterranean and supplying that oil and that gasoline. Massawa, the miracle at Massawa directly relates to that. So, yeah, it's a pretty big story. I can't tell you why I guess it's not real sexy, even though you could make a sexy story if you wanted to, but it's was kind of rudimentary in securing North Africa. And once that invasion of North Africa started, and Eisenhower did his thing, it was game over. You know what I mean? It was over. They were positioned to strategically end the war, and people don't automatically talk about it. They talk about Normandy. I don't know that Normandy would have been able to happen as successfully if we had not had the clandestine services and if North Africa had not been secured. One thing that did happen in Massawa or in Eritrea, which is the country in which Massawa is, the Italians also destroyed a Air Force base that they had at a place called Gura. And what very few people know was that when they destroyed it, Churchill wanted that base redone too. He needed an air base because the only people fighting Rommel to the north were the Brits. And their airplanes were getting shot up. They needed a place for these planes to be serviced and repaired and all that kind of stuff. And there was nothing in North Africa. The closest thing was Gura. And he needed help. He was stretched so thin, he needed help. So again, he called Roosevelt and said, "What can you do?" Well, at the time that he asked Roosevelt for help with Gura, we hadn't entered the war. So there was no way for him to, through the war acts or anything like that, to send people to Gura. So he went to Boeing and what was the other Air Force? I'm drawing a blank on the other big airplane company. But he went to these two companies and said, "Look, I need your help." And those two companies, on their own and out of their own pocket, sent engineers and repair people to Gura. They repaired Gura. They got the runways up and running. They repaired the buildings and got Gura functioning to repair the British airplanes. And they did it out of their own pocket, and nobody knows about it. It was a thing called Project 19. They actually gave it a name, Project 19. And Roosevelt authorized it through these two companies, and they did it, and they did it for free, just out of that sense of patriotism. I don't know if we'd get that today. You know what I mean? They'd probably be look at what it costs to revamp an entire Air Force base, but they worked together on it, and it was quite successful. So they ended up actually refurbishing two bases, the air base at Gura and the naval base at Massawa.
And what was it about your research, your understanding of what had happened in Eritrea during this time that led you to think, okay, this is the thing that I can build a story around? What was that spark?
My brother gave me a book that Captain or the Commander Ellsberg had written. It's called Under the Red Sea Sun. And that is a firsthand account of what happened at Massawa from the day he was asked to go until the day he got transferred out. And in that, without giving away one of the big key pieces in the book, in my book, was what happened when he got there and what happened while he was trying to get that base refurbished. It was not an easy track. This man struggled big time. And in particular, he struggled with one area that contributed to the idea, oh, there's something going on here that is conspiratorial and that shouldn't be happening. And that's the nugget that I grabbed hold of to build my novel.
So, how long did it take you to research enough that you felt comfortable starting the book? How long were you at it before you started? And then was there ongoing research as you wrote?
Ongoing, but it took about the better part of a year
Really?
for me to do all the research. I ended up, because it was at the time, this was a secret thing. So it wasn't, there weren't a whole lot of books about it. Ellsberg's book was great, but I ended up having to go to the National Archives. And all of this stuff had been declassified, thank goodness. So I was able to spend a day there simply going through all the things that had happened in Eritrea, especially at Massawa and at Gura, and look at these handwritten notes. It was incredible, Stacy. I was reading notes, from Roosevelt and Eisenhower and Truman, and looking at the maps and what their plans were and what they were thinking and how they were going to help Churchill and all this kind of stuff. It was incredible to see that firsthand. And after that, then I felt like, okay, I've got a command on what happened here that I thought I could go ahead and start writing. So in the actual writing of the book, 2 years, it took 2 years.
Really? Mm-hmm. And how tricky is it to write historical fiction and to feel like you've gotten it correct?
Right.
Because as we all know, readers of historical fiction are notorious for finding the errors.
Oh, yeah. And boy, that could be ruthless too. The The thing about historical fiction, especially when you're going back when there's not detailed accounts, and even when there are detailed accounts, it depends on who's doing the accounting because it's interpreted. Whoever's writing it is interpreting what has value and what does not. So I went back, following Bud's lead, I went back to the original sources as much as I could. In fact, Commander Ellsberg's grandson actually started a website in his grandfather's honor. And I was able to, his name is Ted Pollard. And I contacted Ted, had great conversations about his grandfather. But Ted made letters available to me that the Commander Ellsberg had written to his wife while he was at Massawa. So where I had blanks in the research, I could actually go back into these letters and begin to extrapolate what might have been happening during those blank periods where I did not have any type of documentation. That was extremely valuable. Those letters were incredible. And then there are websites, military websites, that give reliable ones that also provided some key information with regard to what was actually happening militarily as Massawa was beginning to be revamped. That being said, there were still holes in the history that I literally had to say, okay, this is where fiction is going to come in, and I'm going to make an educated guess as to what I think how A got to B, and I disclosed that up front that that it is a work of fiction. It is based on historical facts, but there was no kind of detailed history that I could tap on. I had to tap multiple people, multiple books, multiple places, multiple things to try and put this all together.
How did this series, this book, differ from what you had written before? I mean, this was a big project to tackle. So I'm curious how it was in some ways similar and what you had done before was easily utilized again for this one, or and what was different? What other skills, what other changes did you have to make in writing this one?
The first three books that I wrote, The Wiregrass, Moonwater, and Life Dust, were books that had ties to my history or my husband's history that I wanted my children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to be able to have. Now, granted, they're historical fiction, but the elements were still there. They were going to know what life looked like at this point in time. So there's that piece. Massawa, if my kids read it and they like it, that's great. But it doesn't have a whole lot. I was not kid, you know what I mean? So that tie into the family is gone. But one of the things that I did after my first book was published, after The Wiregrass was published, going through the editorial process of publishing a book when you've got developmental editors and line by line editors, and they do not take prisoners. They're not my friend. They are my
Right.
people who are working for me and working for my publisher, and they want the books to be as good as they can possibly be. Well, it was a lesson for me. I came out of academia. I'm a longtime nurse academic, nurse practitioner. I still practice as a nurse practitioner, but I wasn't raised in the world of creative writing. So that first book, which did incredibly well, but I tell you what, it started out at 119,000 words. And by the time the developers, the developmental editors got a hold of it, it was chopped down to 93,000 words. And I felt like an appendage had been cut off. But that being said, it was an incredible lesson in brevity. I didn't know when I wrote The Wiregrass that the average novel is between 70 and now 90,000 words. I didn't know that. I know it now. So when I write now, I look towards hitting that kind of magic range. The other thing is that there are rules when it comes to literary writing. Now, in my first book, I managed to hit most of them, but some of them I didn't hit. And, I knew it immediately when the line by line editors and the developmental editors were talking to me. I said, I didn't realize that. So I set about trying to get to learn about these literary rules for writing. There was nothing in my region. I'm in the tip top of Virginia, really close to Northern Virginia, DC, and there was nothing there. But I happened to find an organization in Richmond, Virginia. It's called James River Writers, and they were advertising, which is about 2 hours south of me. They were advertising a class that a man was doing, a New York Times bestselling author was doing. And I thought, what the heck? So I talked with my husband. I said, all right. And he said, if you want to go, go. So I ended up signing up for this class. And unbeknownst to me, when I signed up, I told my publicist at the time, what I was doing. And she contacted this guy who was teaching the class. His name was David L. Robbins. He's a New York Times bestselling author, and told David that I was, had just published my first book, and it had not been published yet. It was at the publishers. Would he consider reading it and blurbing it? Well, I didn't know she had done this, right? Until after it was done. So she told me, so I have to go into this first class knowing that my publicist did this, and I'm thinking that he thinks that I'm just taking the class to get him to blurb the book. So, but anyway, I sucked it up and I went in. I said, I need this class. So I walked in, and this guy stands up. And if you know David, he's like 6'5", 6'6". He's this mountain of man. And he stands up and he puts his finger in my face and he says, "You're good, but I'm going to make you better." And daggone it, if he didn't. What that night in that class started we ended up with a group of 4 in a writing group that studied for 2 years with David.
Wow.
And he does not take prisoners. Oh my golly, Ned. I came out of that class more time in tears than you could possibly imagine. But he knows the infrastructure of a novel. Most people don't even realize there's an infrastructure of a novel, but he knew it and he could spot it like X-ray vision when it wasn't there. So for 2 years, 3 other folks and I studied with him. And coming out of those first 3 books, that was huge in my being able to transition enough to say, okay, I'm taking this out of the land of, family connections, and I'm going to test the waters with true historical fiction. And I'm still indebted to him. He's a good friend. I just love him to death. I don't want him reading my work right now because I know he'd probably just tear it up. But anyway, I did actually send Massawa to him because he writes World War II. And if you don't think that didn't have a pucker factor when I sent it to him, he's this expert who does historical fiction, and I put this in the land of him. But he loved the book and he blurbed this one as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So coming out of that, just getting me to be a better writer, learning what the rules were, but also learning when you know what the rules are, you know where you can bend them and you know where you can break them and do it in a way that adds to the book, that is not a distractor to people who know infrastructure and they're reading it with a critical eye.
Right.
The reviews from Massawa have been great. And one of the things that just struck me so well is that it got a Kirkus star review, and one of the notes on that was that it got an A on the editing, which was a big part of what David, kind of pushed, that, you've got to, in fact, he said every word has to be interviewed, and it actually worked. So anyway, that kind of history is what led to the writing of Massawa, and that's leading to the writing of the sequel.
And let's talk about that, because I was going to ask you what is next for you. So this Massawa is the first in this new series. Where do you go from here?
The story of Massawa kind of gets wrapped up, but that conspiracy that I was telling you about has tentacles. And in the sequel, we're going after the tentacles.
Exciting. Okay. And do you have a plan? Is it 3 books in the series? Could there be more? Do you have it mapped out? Do you already know all the stories to follow and how that's going to come? Or was this a case of, let me just do this one first and then I will tackle the next one when the time comes?
I am envisioning at least 3. I've got 2 is already kind of the tentative map. I don't do detailed mapping, but I do general mapping. 2 is mapped out, and I see 3 formulating. Now, what happens after 3, I'm not sure yet. We'll see. If there's another one, if there's a line for Kit to go somewhere else, then yeah, we'll go somewhere else. But right now I'm seeing 3.
Okay. And you're enjoying writing Kit. You're enjoying having her in.
Oh yeah, like I said, she's my alter ego.
Good. So, well, let's hope you can follow her around for a while. That would be fun.
Seriously. And one of the things I'm not I don't have a lot of sex in my books, but one of the things that I had to, in fact, I don't have any sex in my books, but one of the things that I had to come to grips with was what, with Donovan being such a womanizer and the utilizing of women, what came to the forefront in World War II was this whole thing of sexpionage. And that the Germans, when they invaded France, they set up like 20 different brothels, and it was all they were all the women were all German spies, and they were designed to get Allied and resistant information on the Allies and the resistance who were in occupied France. So this idea of sexpionage was rampant in World War II, and it's one of the things that Kit has to come to terms with. So tackling that and doing it in a tasteful way. I'm not a 50 Shades of Grey kind of gal. But I think you couldn't ignore it, and it does play a role. So finding a way to do that tastefully in a way that what was happening at the time you could see and it sounded real, but without the explicit sex.
Yeah. Yeah. That is tricky. But I mean, some
It's
writers are extremely comfortable putting that on the page, and others
Yeah.
would prefer not to.
Yeah, I want my friends and readers and my children are going to read this book, and I don't want anybody blushing over it. You know what I mean? That being said, I didn't shy away from it, but it's if you, in fact, you would appreciate this. I had a woman email me one time that I really wasn't writing adult fiction because I did not have sex in it, and I'm sitting there thinking, what? But you cannot do espionage in World War II and not address it. It's there. So I tried to tackle it in a way that made the story intriguing and made the characters interesting and real.
Yeah. While still being comfortable writing it yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now that we know that you're hard at work on book 2, while people wait for that one, where should they go if they want to learn more about you, Massawa, your other books, things that you have going on, etc.?
A good place to start is my website, www.pamwebber.com. All of the books are there. Things that we're doing are there. If they want to contact me, they can contact me through the website. There's a messaging tab available that they can message. I have book clubs and organizations contact me through that messaging if they want me to meet with their club virtually or if they're close enough in person. And then they can also just email me, pbwebber at gmail.com. If they have, actually it's pbwebber1 at gmail.com. I don't send myself emails enough to remember that address too well, but they're welcome to contact me. I love talking with readers, and some of my best critiques come from people who like the work, and they'll say, well, what happened with A, B, or C? And it's something I didn't wrap up, or, they give great feedback. So the next book turns out a little bit better.
Right. Oh, yeah. Very good. Well, hopefully people will pick up a copy. And to that end, where's the best place to go if they want to pick up a copy of Massawa?
Anywhere. It's being distributed by Simon and Schuster, so it's in all the major bookstores. They can independent and the big larger retailers. They can get it on Amazon. On my website, there's something called a link tree, I think, that my publicist put together, that they can click one link in that website and see where all the places where they can order it. Like if they wanted to order straight from Barnes and Noble, they could. If they wanted to order straight from BAM, they could. Those links are at the website.
Excellent. Well, Pam, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast, and I want to wish you luck with Massawa and the work in progress. We will eagerly await that one. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Stacey, thanks so much. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to The Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is all about helping readers discover new voices. This show brings you into conversation with authors from every corner of the writing world, and each of them has a story worth hearing. I'm your host, Stacey Horan, author of the Old City Mystery series and several standalone novels. Sharing conversations with fellow writers is one of my favorite parts of the creative life, and I'm thrilled to bring those conversations to you. Keep listening, keep exploring, and keep finding the stories that speak to you. There's always another treasure waiting here in the bookshop at the end of the internet.